Lavender Coretta contains mature themes. All videos are kept unage restricted so that the information provided is free to all, regardless of age or demographic. However, viewer discretion is advised. Well, that certainly was an interesting video. I gotta tell ya, it's been a while since I've had a video as controversial as that one was. But you guys did make your arguments in the comments. I read through all of them. It's nice to read a lot of different perspectives on something. Anyway, for this video, I decided that I wanted to tackle something a little more personal. It's called the Futanari problem, and describes how my sexual palate has developed over the years. This is probably going to be the most revealing video I've ever done, maybe even more revealing than my sexual journey. If you haven't seen that one, I definitely still recommend watching it. It was a really fun video to make, but it hits pretty hard. Keep in mind that in videos like these, I'm just describing my experience, and yours might be different, okay? Let's get into it. I'm going to go through everything that I can remember. There's a lot, so hopefully I don't miss anything too significant. I remember my first time seeing any kind of pornographic content or nudity. I was in a barber shop waiting for a haircut. I must have been like 6 or 7. One of the magazines I was reading had this section with a swimsuit model on a beach. And in one of the pictures, she was kind of naked. Kind of. You could see her breasts and just a little bit of nipple. The title was, "So-and-so shows her skin." I don't remember her name. Typical, I guess. I was too busy focusing on something else. Even after all these years, I recall that first encounter being special. I would try to find that magazine on subsequent visits, but they must have recycled it for another magazine. I don't know. And I'd still love to find this magazine issue someday. It would have been around like 2008, maybe. I think it was one of the main magazine carriers or whatever. One of the ones that allows slight nudity, or at least they did back in that time. Next, for me, was the internet. This was back in the day where you would search Google Images for funny memes. Remember that? I would do that pretty regularly. Even if there was some stuff I definitely shouldn't have seen. One of these images, I don't even know how you'd find it today. It was a picture of a Japanese woman in a suggestive pose. I don't remember the text part of the meme, but like the magazine, I kept trying to return to this specific image time and time again. I can't believe I never got caught doing that, especially considering younger me didn't know how to delete the device's history. This was before I learned about masturbation, by the way. This is several years before that, so I was just looking at this stuff and that was it. I believe this was around the time that I got my own device, an iPod. Soon discovered what internet porn was. You know, the hub. Actually, this was the one that I used for years, and it was like my main thing, probably for the better part of a decade. I'm one of those people that once you find something that works, you just stick to it. I talk about this period of my life in detail in my sexual journey, but at this time, I was new to the game. So, search terms would be very simple and kind of innocent. Naked people, butts, boobs, things like that. I hadn't yet learned terminology specific to sex acts like blowjob and threesome. I didn't know about any of that yet. I think I did know POV after seeing enough videos, and that's something that I haven't... the POV category is something that's been a mainstay for a while. I'll just say that. It didn't take long for me to learn what these terms meant, but that doesn't mean I would search for them specifically. I also got into drawing around this time. I would draw myself as a cartoon man fighting aliens, you know, stuff like that. The typical stuff for someone my age. A lot of people ask every day, why is your avatar a woman? And I've given many explanations over the years, but this was really the catalyst for that. Every artist at some point realizes that they have the ability to draw whatever they want, and it wouldn't take long for me to try to draw my own NSFW. And around this time, when I realized there's no rules, I can kind of draw whatever I want, I started drawing myself as a woman because, I don't know, I liked the idea of being someone who is like beautiful. Suggestive posts on Instagram influenced me to draw my own NSFW. Of course, I was really bad at it at first. You know, boobs were just big circles. There was a nearly catastrophic incident where someone was going through my school binder, and I had forgotten that one of these drawings was in there. but funny enough, they couldn't even decipher what it was. That's how bad I was starting out. And it was all pencil paper, of course. I wouldn't get a drawing tablet until years later. Ooh, hang on. I don't have hot chocolate this time, but I do have cream soda. They have this 89-cent brand at Kroger. It's not good at all, but it's cheap. The important thing to note here is that at this point, drawing my own boobs and butts and whatever didn't really elicit any sort of reaction from me. It does today, definitely, but I'll get into that later. It was probably because I just wasn't good enough at it. Like, I wasn't good enough at drawing. I think I was in like 5th grade at the time. So I would have been 10 or 11. Right around the time where puberty would start to hit me, but before it would go full swing. Maybe my body just wasn't ready to feel anything from that stuff yet. I remember the first time I saw Rule34 of a character that I knew. And I hate this memory. It was Garnet from Steven Universe.
Kids, don't be racist.
Literally. It was really well drawn. I mean, I think I found it on Google Images. I wasn't looking for it, but it was there. The reason this Garnet, Rule34, grossed me out so much was because it was something that Steven Universe, I used to really ride or die for that show. It was something I found a lot of non-sexual enjoyment in. I was a fan of the show. I didn't like that I had this image in my head. A lot of people have left comments under my Rule34 videos about their theory of why Rule34 is so popular. And they say it's because it takes something that's comforting, like a childhood character, and applies a modern, adult-oriented experience. I can definitely see the argument for that, but for me, that does not happen. No, I don't like the non-sexual mixing with the sexual. At least not like that. It also grossed me out because if you know Steven Universe, you know that Garnet is basically 2 kids in a trench coat. So, nope, didn't like it. Despite that, this did introduce me to Rule34, and I would start to see more of it and become okay with it. I'm still primarily watching live action porn at this point, but it starts to mix into those search results. My consumption of internet porn in general gradually increases, and it becomes a nightly occurrence for me. At this point, porn terms become more specific. This pose, this dynamic, stuff like pog and gangbang, stuff like that I probably learned stuff like that around this time. I wouldn't say I had any sort of preference for any category at this point. I just watch whatever gets me off. Actually, no, I did know who Mia Khalifa was. Again, I do not recommend this video to anyone under the age of 18, but you know why I keep it on age restricted. Some people might need to hear this. But yeah, I did know who good old Mia K was. In my opinion, she's still the best to ever do it. Not just for the boob job she had done. The way her videos are directed, genuinely, like the casual banter she has with other actors is something you almost never see in porn because they only cut it like a movie, like a script. But I love the videos that just leave in the banter. That's awesome. And if you know her story about why she got into the industry, again, not advocating for anybody to get into the industry, as it got me doxxed last time, and I would never actually advocate for that. She probably regrets a lot of what she did for a good reason. But if you read her story about why she felt the need to get into the porn industry and the way she recovered from it, the damage it did, it's a really good story. I'll probably do a full video on her someday, but it might have to be Patreon exclusive because I don't think YouTube's gonna love that. At this point, I'm still finding about half of my porn on Google Images. I knew a few models by name and would Google their pictures. I'm not gonna say their names since it is still sort of embarrassing, but they were a bit niche, definitely not on Mia's level. I do remember that one of them had latex very prominently in their work, and while latex doesn't really do it for me, I can sort of see why it would do it for some people. You might be wondering how I haven't gotten caught yet. Well, that would all end here. Someone found a taxi porn video in the search history on my iPod. And when I say taxi porn, I mean like the classic somebody gets into a taxi and, oh, I don't have any money. That kind of story is kind of goofy to me. It doesn't really work, but I don't know. I was trying whatever at that point. Anyway, I got my phone taken away for a few days, and when I got it back, it had parental controls on it. Fair enough. So I was out of the game for a little while, but when I eventually got a new phone, it didn't have the lock on it. Live action porn continues to be my main thing for years. And the reason I bring this up is because you'll know when it changes. I eventually got a digital drawing tablet, the Wacom tablet that I have today. I've changed it out, they don't last very long, but I did get one. And I want to say this was around high school, like second or third year of high school. It took a while to learn how to use it, but once I did, I learned how to do things like shadows on my characters, and that was revolutionary. Finally, I can draw my NSFW in high definition. Nah, it was still bad. I am not good at art. I know I say this a lot. I'm not saying it to be self-deprecating. I am not someone who is like naturally gifted or has an eye for the visual. And this was all before I seriously studied any kind of anatomy or posing or perspective. But I continued to put them on my Instagram where they would eventually get a little better. I learned some techniques, some complex ideas, and I really towed the line between safe for work and not safe for work. If I can find some of those old drawings, I'll put them on the screen because I don't know how nobody said anything. Genuinely. How I didn't get caught doing this, I have no idea. Maybe people were just embarrassed. About 5 years ago, during COVID, I started my YouTube channel with some of my female characters. I started out doing movie reviews, kind of shitty stuff. But whatever I made, I put a lot of emphasis into my drawings, and I spent a lot of time getting better at it. You can still find these videos early on my channel. Oop, I misread that line completely. You can still find these earlier videos on my channel. Candles changed her design, her appearance, in every video, and it would be a while until I settled on her first official look. It was a blue version of Agretzko, which I had just watched the first season of at that time. Progress was slow because I'm just not naturally gifted at drawing. I get a lot of compliments about my art nowadays, which I love you guys for, but trust me, I am seriously not naturally inclined at this stuff. I'm still learning how to do things that I should have learned years ago. Anyway, I would soon hit that point where my pornographic drawings exploded in competency, and there were a few key changes that needed to happen for this to occur. A big one was multiply layer. The multiply layer type is crucial for drawing shadows and muscles. Fun fact, I'm getting more and more transparent about this every day, but last night I had one of my 6-hour benders, and I learned how to draw a butthole with multiply layers. That'll come in handy, trust me. I also learned how to use the alpha mask, which is when you tell your computer sometimes I talk too fast. It's when you tell your computer to contain your artwork inside a specific shape. And in this case, it's contained inside the body shape you've already drawn. It makes shading a lot easier. Before this point, I would draw every single shadow with the airbrush, and then erase what's outside of the line. And now I don't have to do that. I also learned After Effects, where I could make simple animations. Now, flash forward to college. I'm still somewhat addicted to porn, and I classify it as an addiction because it's one of the reasons I never dated, I think. My view of sex was warped by many things when I was young, and porn was definitely one of them. It convinced me that sex was strictly performative. You had to convince someone to enter this gross situation just so you could experience pleasure. At least that's what I believed sex was. But in reality, I know that sex is usually Whoa, I need to slow down. This script is a longer one, and I get, my voice can't make it very far. You guys know that about me, though. I need some cream soda. Okay. As I was saying, oh my goodness. As I was saying, sex is usually a lot more natural and hopefully mutual. You're doing it with someone because they want to do it too, not just you. And as guys, I think we generally forget that, or never learn it in the first place. I'm deep in the weeds now. My search terms are as complex as you can get, trying to find niche things. There's a lot of POV in there. That's my main. It's definitely voyeuristic. I'm not searching for porn to insert myself into the scenario. Do other people do that? I don't know if this is just me, or if it's not as common a thing, but when I'm watching porn, I don't try to imagine myself. I don't know. Maybe people do that, maybe they don't. I myself am more into like the angle of the camera, what specifically is in frame. Like a butt can look really good
from a certain point of view.
You know what I mean? There's just certain angles that they're really good, is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes even the story of the video. My favorite videos, again, like I said earlier, are the ones where either before or after the scene or whatever, the actors just kind of talk to each other like normal people. They're just riffing. It creates a scenario of comfort, which just really, really works for me, I guess. Mia Khalifa does this in some of her best videos, and I know of only a few others that have really done this. One of my all-time favorites, which I haven't been able to find this video since the porn ban, unfortunately, is one where both actors, they're done, they're still covered in sweat and other fluids just sitting there, and they just keep the cameras rolling so that they can talk about Twitter for like 10 minutes. And the guy says something like, I appreciate that you weren't on your phone for the shoot because a lot of girls that I work with are addicted to their phones. It was nice to just talk to you, which is so wholesome, and I love that. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. So, a few years ago, I decided to start fighting my porn addiction for real. I was sick of having it control me. I think the real catalyst for this was having a panic attack one night. I don't know if I think I did mention this one time before, but the only time this has ever happened to me, I don't know if the porn had anything to do with it, but it happened right in the middle of a session, so I think it might have. I was now in my own apartment with no roommates, so I was free to do it whenever I wanted. I started this schedule where I wouldn't watch porn all week, not until Sunday, where I would clear the entire day to watch and draw as much of it as I wanted. I didn't force it every Sunday, but that was the day that I allocated that I said, okay, I can do it today if I feel like it. This decision came from the first actually good NSFW drawing I've ever done. It was a simple, wordless comic of 4 panels, where the same 2 characters would be in different positions. These 2 characters weren't Candles and Coretta, by the way, it's just 2 no-names that I got for this project. That's how a lot of my drawings go, actually. I don't plan on using Candles or Coretta, it's just a different character. But in this comic, they developed their own tastes as they got older, and the guy got bigger because, I guess in this fictional universe, size has no limit, but pretty standard. Anyway, the point is, it created this nice little visual story of them developing as they became an older and older couple. And this was the first drawing to really have an effect on me. It was like someone who had only drank beer just took a swig of vodka. Immediately, I said, I have to know how to do this again. I want to do more of these, but in a controlled way. Because I realize something like this you do over and over again, you're going to get lost in the sauce. So, just once a week, I would do this. I could do more than one drawing, but I could only do it on that day. This went on for about 6 weeks, and in those 6 weeks, I doubled my skill level in drawing. I already made a video about this called the 12-hour edge, or something like that, and that's when I found my true limits. I've explained it before, but the reason this system works is because when you have a deeply satisfying experience like this, the post-nut clarity lasts about a week. Not even kidding, a week. It's easy to not watch porn for the rest of that week because nothing is going to top the experience you just had. And again, I'd like to reiterate here that I do not condone anyone under the age of 18 try this. It's much better to establish a real-world relationship before you get into this kind of hobby. If I could do it over again, I would have prioritized dating over this. Since I was searching for porn to use as a reference for drawing and not necessarily to get off to, I started expanding my reach beyond what I was initially interested in. I've used all kinds of references. Straight, gay, trans, anything that didn't cross any personal moral boundaries. I would specifically search for images with a really well-drawn penis or whatever, study it for hours, and draw it until I got good at it. For me, the idea of sex became intertwined with drawing, and drawing improvement. And that's still true to this day. I'm in a weird spot where drawing and sexuality are so closely related to me that it's hard to imagine one without the other. This probably isn't good, and it will take some time in order to correct. But this entanglement had some interesting effects that are worth sharing. Remember how I said I was still mainly consuming live action stuff? That's definitely not true anymore. This is the point where it changes. I'm now almost exclusively looking at animated or drawn pornography, since it's easier to study anatomy that way. And yes, I'm gonna hear the comments by the artists, you should study real people, blah blah blah. It's just not as fun for me. I'm studying art to get better at drawing, sure, but I'm always going to take the path that's more fun for me personally, even if it takes longer to get there. It's also opened me up to things I didn't think I'd be into. I'm not gonna get specific though. When it came time to actually write this script, I thought I was ready to be transparent about it, but I guess not yet. I'm still straight, but when you're 6 hours deep into one of these drawing sessions, the rules start to bend a little. I'll explain this a bit better a little bit down the line. I don't want to spoil the ending. For this video specifically, I looked through all of the NSFW drawings I have saved, and I found some interesting things. If you sort oldest to newest, there's definitely some patterns there. I used to draw characters with extra vibrant fur colors. Scarlet red, deep blues, God forbid I use straight up yellow. And I quickly discovered that earth tones functioned much better, as they're easier on the eyes, they're more realistic, and shadows looked much better on these characters. Penis size increased up to a point where it was absolutely ridiculous. Like, sometimes they were as big as people. In order to move forward, I instead focused on making the penis look heavy, rather than big. Drawing a dick with more weight is way better than just drawing one that's as big as possible, in my opinion. Because there is a point where it just gets ridiculous. In the early days of doing this, I chased better visuals. More shading, more realistic. Kind of like how movies and video games today have the goal of better special effects, better graphics, respectively. But after a while, I hit a limit on how detailed I could make it look without it seriously clashing with my line art capabilities and Candle's cartoony style. So I started focusing on drawing better poses with less shading, and this is way better. It allows me to implement some stylistic choices, and I don't need to worry about everything looking absolutely correct all of the time. You might be wondering if I draw candles in any of these scenarios. Nope. Early on, I did it a few times, as she was the only design that I had. But I developed a distaste for it, because candles does represent me to a certain extent, and I started creating different characters for each scene. Coretta is actually the result of this process, and so is the character in the drawing I just put on Patreon. There would also be times where my drawing skills would plateau, and this would sort of ruin the fun. It's weird, but if I'm not improving in some way, it doesn't work. Like, I can't get off. Arousal should not be wired to improvement, but it is for me while I'm doing this for some reason. So when I plateau in those skills, I remake older drawings. And this has led to some of my best work, as I'm able to pinpoint exactly what I've improved on since the original. Sometimes I focus too much on the line art, and the shading turns out rushed. I'd still say my best work was in those first 6 weeks, since I was doing whatever I found to be hot, and there wasn't anything influencing my drawings. Nowadays, I try to do poses that are slightly more difficult to challenge myself. My next challenge, from right now onward, is definitely the hands. A lot of artists hide the hands so they don't have to draw them, and they're pretty difficult. But if you can get them to look really good, it'll make the drawing so much better and so much more convincing. Finally, with a raspy-ass voice at this point, we arrive at the most profound effect. Every character that I draw is Futanari. You may have called this twist from the title of the video and where this video is going, but that's why I called it what I did. The boundaries of sex and gender are completely broken in the Candles universe. By looking at all kinds of references, by experiencing other people's fantasies through their own works, it sort of causes sex dynamics to be broken down into their base elements. Sex characteristics might be found on any character. Dynamics that are typical for one group are now found in another. Stereotypes can be leaned into, broken, or completely ignored if it suits the scene. And this is the main point I wanted to make with this video. For better or for worse, drawing my own porn has had this really interesting effect of breaking the concept of gender. Obviously, I know reality, but for fiction, drawing a Futanari character doesn't even feel weird or different anymore. Like, it doesn't clock in my head that that's not correct. Maybe this will eventually be a net positive as it breaks down those traditional gender barriers. I'd like to think so. Nowadays, there's actually more emphasis on the scene. Instead of, zeroing in on how good this butt looks in this shot, I like to focus more on my characters, their motivations, how they ended up in this scene, how they feel about it. I found that ultimately, what makes this stuff really attractive is the story. Like, I started out appreciating the story kind of, but not really understanding why. Then I got into the base elements. I like boobs, I like butts, I like dicks, whatever.
Chat, clip that.
But then after so long, everything kind of abstracts, and what you're left with is, I want to make a good story. The story is what's important again. It's why porn studios still make videos with full scripts and character motivations. Making a GIF loop is easier and arguably even more effective, but there really isn't anything like a good story. It's with this realization that sexuality graduates from a base drive to an art form. The realization that the characters' personalities matter more than their figure for the purposes of arousal, that's special. I don't just say, personality matters more, guys, just to be woke or whatever. I genuinely believe it at this point, even if the road to get here was weird. The reason I call this the Futanari problem is because this arc that I went through isn't inherently good. I recognize that it might ultimately be bad. I can't just sit here and pretend that I don't 100% know that what I've done won't be terrible for me when I eventually start dating. How do I pitch that to somebody? By the way, I draw my own porn. Like, that's not attractive. If I could do it over again, I would have waited to do this until I was dating somebody. But I can't change what I've done. All I can do is observe and report on what's happened to me. Would I recommend you going down my path? No. But if you find yourself going down this path, at least you know where it's headed. My advice to you is to always keep yourself grounded. All of this stuff is fiction at the end of the day. As long as you can separate fiction from reality, as long as you can separate those two, you'll be okay. There's a couple more things that I wanted to bring up here before we get this over with. Let's say that I'm not the only one who's gone through this specific arc of drawing porn and expanding their skills and knowledge. This individual would probably end up in the same place as me, with the barriers of gender norms broken down. Now, this sounds good on the surface, but if all roads lead to Futanari, doesn't that kind of ruin trans visibility? A society full of straight people whose only experience of women with dicks being inherently sexual isn't a good thing. But I suppose you could argue that Futanari does not mean trans. My characters might be Futa, but that doesn't mean that they've gone through the event of transitioning, which is a big part of the trans experience, I'm sure. Maybe it's better to just teach the difference. I'm interested if others have gone through the same character arc that I have. I suspect that I'm not alone in this experience. And if that's true, this is something that can become known to us. It can be predicted. There were steps along the way where I could have fallen into worse places. I could have ended up on 4chan, doxing people. That's basically one step away from getting sucked into this rabbit hole of loneliness and internet porn. I'd like to imagine a future where others feel comfortable enough to share their experience. If we know more about it, we can identify the mechanisms that cause people to become lonelier than they already are. So, I hope there's still time for me to develop into a normal person. It's gotta happen at some point. There's other factors influencing things like dating, the economy, politics. It's not as easy as waking up one day and deciding, I have a girlfriend now. But I have to believe that talking about it, what I'm doing right now, will help me push through it. Maybe there is a future where people are comfortable enough in their sexuality that other guys can cut themselves some slack, and they can start kind of supporting each other. I don't want to fall deeper into the gooning spiral, I guess you could call it that, but there is precedent that tells us that isn't inevitable. Research shows that fantasies aren't acted out in real life. As long as you know the difference between what's a fantasy and what's real, you'll be okay. And that's what I hope for. I hope that all this effort, all this transparency about my sexual journey, all of this is moving towards something positive. And I sincerely hope that I'm not leading others to a grim fate. Still, it would be nice to have an environment that provided support and accountability for each other. But until then, we push forward. Hopefully all of this stuff straightens itself out in the end. So, if you're comfortable, share your story in the comments. Have you experienced something like this in your life? The more people we can get to open up about this stuff, the more normal it can be. I still don't think banning pornography will be effective. I think it's okay to engage with it if you're old enough, and if it's the cherry on top of a pre-existing relationship, and not a replacement for intimacy. But we can only hope. Anyway, my voice is gone. Where did it go? It's completely vanished. My name is Candles. I love you all. Good night.